Santos Montana had learned to read people in silence during his 13 years running Memphis's most sophisticated crime family. Every breath, every tremor, every lie. But when the blonde woman crashed through the etched glass doors of Nocturne on his 38th birthday, leaving a trail of crimson across his white marble floors, the only thing he could read was death chasing her shadow. She collapsed 6 feet from where he stood. Her green eyes found his through the crowd, desperate and fading. And something ancient and protective roared to life in his chest. Someone had tried to silence her. Someone had made her bleed. And Santos Montana would make damn sure they never touched her again. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. Before we begin today's story, I'd love a small favor from you. Please subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the stories we share here. It only takes a second, and it helps us continue creating the powerful, heartfelt stories you love. Your support keeps this channel alive and growing. Tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Now, sit back and let's step back into our story. Julia Robert had been running her freelance photo restoration business in Memphis for 3 years, and she'd learned which clients paid on time, which projects were worth taking, and which late-night work sessions let her focus without distractions. At 26, she lived for those quiet hours alone with her computer and tablet, bringing damaged photographs back to life, restoring faded wedding photos, recovering fire-damaged family albums, digitizing century-old portraits before they crumbled to dust. The extra projects she took every month helped pay off her father's medical bills, debts left behind when cancer took him 2 years ago, along with the guilt that she'd been too focused on building her business to spend more time with him while she could. Tonight she wore faded jeans, a vintage band t-shirt under her denim jacket, and comfortable sneakers that had coffee stains she'd never quite managed to remove. Her light blonde hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her laptop and digital equipment were packed in the leather bag her father had given her for graduation. She'd agreed to meet a new client at his office building. After hours, he was paying triple her usual rate to digitize and restore an entire collection of historical photographs for a private art collection. The work would take weeks. The money would finally clear her father's remaining debt. The downtown office building was supposed to be mostly empty at 11 p.m. That's why Julia heard the voices so clearly echoing through the parking garage. Italian accent, then Irish, sharp, threatening. She pressed herself against her car, heart hammering, and peered around the concrete pillar. Fox Carboni. She recognized him from their earlier meeting, the well-dressed art dealer who'd hired her to restore photographs of valuable paintings for authentication purposes. He was on his knees, hands raised. The man standing over him had cold eyes and a gun that looked too casual in his grip. Territory disputes get messy, Fox. You should have stayed out of Montana's business. The gunshot made Julia flinch, made her gasp, made her visible. The Irish enforcer's head snapped toward her hiding spot. Their eyes met for one frozen second. Then Julia ran. She heard him coming, heard his footsteps echoing through the garage. She burst through the stairwell door into the Memphis night, adrenaline screaming through her veins. 3 blocks. If she could just make it 3 blocks to Beale Street where there'd be crowds, witnesses, safety. Pain exploded in her left side. Hot, devastating. The world tilted sideways. She'd been stabbed. Julia stumbled forward, clutching her ribs where blood was already soaking through her denim jacket. She couldn't breathe right, couldn't think, just needed to get away, needed help, needed lights, golden and warm, a building ahead with etched glass doors and the word Nocturne in elegant script. People inside meant safety. People inside meant the killer couldn't finish what he started. Julia crashed through those doors with the last of her strength. The music stopped. Every face turned toward her. A man in an expensive black suit stood on a curved staircase, champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. Even through her blurring vision, Julia registered him tall, dark-haired, radiating authority that made the air itself seem to straighten in his presence. His dark eyes locked onto hers. One hand lifted in a single gesture. Every person in the room stopped moving. He descended those stairs like a predator, controlled and purposeful. Julia's legs gave out. She hit her knees. The white marble was cool against her palms as crimson spread beneath her. Strong hands caught her before she collapsed completely. "Christo," a voice said above her, deep, rough, with an accent that turned the word into something almost reverent. The man from the staircase knelt beside her, his expensive suit now streaked with her blood. His eyes were intense, calculating, and somehow gentle all at once. "Who did this to you?" "They killed him," Julia gasped, her words slurring as shock took hold. "Fox Carboni, I saw them. The man's entire demeanor changed. Something dangerous flickered behind his controlled expression. Who stabbed you? His voice cut through her panic like a knife, quiet, absolute, demanding truth. Julia's blood-slicked hand grabbed his jacket lapel. She needed him to understand. Needed him to know why death was still coming for her. The man who murdered your art dealer. For one heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Santos, Montana, because she realized now who he must be, whose club this was, whose world she'd just stumbled into, made a decision that would change everything. Get Dr. Ricci, he commanded without looking away from her. His voice carried absolute authority. Lock down the club. No one leaves. Sweep the perimeter. Men in dark suits materialized from shadows, moving with military precision. Santos slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Julia's head lolled against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat steady, controlled, while hers was trying to escape her ribcage. What's your name? His question was gentle despite the chaos around them. Julia, she whispered. Julia Robert. Santos carried her toward a private corridor behind the bar, away from the frozen crowd of Memphis elite who'd come to celebrate his birthday. None of them would speak of this. They knew better. You're safe now, Julia. No one touches what's mine. The private office door closed behind them with a soft click. Santos laid her carefully on the leather sofa, his hands immediately pressing against her wounded side. The pressure sent white-hot agony through her body, and she cried out. I know, he said, his voice gentler now but no less commanding. I know it hurts, but I need to stop the bleeding until the doctor arrives. Stay with me, Julia. Keep your eyes open. Julia tried to focus on his face. Strong features, dark eyes that seemed to see everything, a jaw set with determination. Why are you helping me? She managed through gritted teeth. Santos's answer was immediate. Because you witnessed Fox's murder. Because whoever did this works for my enemies. And because you just became the most important person in Memphis whether you realize it or not. Through her fading consciousness, Julia registered those words. She'd stumbled into a war she didn't understand, bleeding and desperate. And somehow, impossibly, the most dangerous man in Memphis had just declared her worth saving. The question was whether that protection would save her life or end it in a different way entirely. Dr. Ricci arrived within 15 minutes, a gray-haired man in his 60s who carried a leather medical bag and asked no questions. Santos had kept him on retainer for over a decade, paying him generously for his silence and expertise, the kind of doctor who treated gunshot wounds at midnight and forgot faces by morning. Knife wound, lateral torso, left side, Santos said, his voice clipped and controlled, but his hands told a different story. They were clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with tension he couldn't quite suppress. She's lost blood. Stabilize her. Dr. Ricci nodded and got to work, cutting away Julia's blood-soaked denim jacket and t-shirt to expose the wound. Santos turned away to give her privacy, but he didn't leave. He couldn't. Something about this woman, this stranger who'd crashed into his carefully controlled world, had gotten under his skin in a way he didn't understand. He'd seen hundreds of injuries over the years, ordered dozens of deaths when necessary. Violence was a language he spoke fluently, a tool he used with precision and detachment. So why did watching this woman's pain feel like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed? The wound is deep but clean, Doctor, Ricci announced, his experienced hands working quickly. Missed the vital organs. She was lucky. Another inch to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation. Lucky. Santos didn't believe in luck. He believed in choices and consequences. Julia had made the choice to run when she witnessed Fox's murder. The consequence was that she'd stumbled into his world bleeding and desperate. And now Santos had made his own choice, one that would have consequences he couldn't yet predict. Tell me what happened, Santos said, moving back to Julia's side as Dr. Ricci began stitching the wound. Start from the beginning. Julia's face was pale, her green eyes glassy with pain and shock, but her voice remained steady. I had a client meeting tonight, Fox Carboni. He hired me last week to restore photographs of paintings for his authentication work. He said he had a private collection, needed digital restoration and archival. Santos's entire body went still. Fox Carboni. Of course. We were supposed to meet at his office building downtown, Julia continued, wincing as the needle pierced her skin. When I got there around 11, the building seemed empty. I parked in the garage and that's when I heard voices. Shouting. I should have left, but I was curious. Stupid. Not stupid, Santos said quietly. Human. Julia's laugh was bitter. I hid behind a concrete pillar and looked. Fox was on his knees. There was another man standing over him with a gun. Irish accent, cold eyes. He said something about territory disputes, about Fox staying out of Montana's business. She looked directly at Santos. Your business. What else did he say? Something about a forgery operation. Then he shot Fox. Just like that. No hesitation, no remorse. Julia's voice cracked. I gasped. I didn't mean to, but I did. And the killer heard me. Our eyes met and I just ran. I made it out of the garage, but he caught up to me 3 blocks away. I felt the knife go in and I thought I was going to die right there on the street. But then I saw your club, and I just kept moving. Doctor. Ricci finished the last stitch and began bandaging the wound. She needs rest, fluids, and antibiotics. The pain medication will make her drowsy. No strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. Santos nodded absently, his mind already working through the implications. Fox Carboni was dead. His legitimate art dealer. The man who'd been helping him build credibility in Memphis's high society for the past 5 years. The man who authenticated the pieces Santos collected, who introduced him to curators and collectors, who made Santos look like a patron of the arts instead of the head of a crime family. Fox's death wasn't random. It was a message, a declaration of war. Dante, Santos called out. His consigliere appeared in the doorway immediately. I need you to verify something. Fox Carboni, art dealer. Check the parking garage at his downtown office building. I want confirmation and I want details. Dante pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway. Santos could hear him making calls, his voice low and urgent. Julia was watching Santos with growing clarity despite the pain medication beginning to take effect. You knew Fox. He worked for me, Santos confirmed. Legitimate business, art authentication, collection management. He helped me build a reputation as a collector and philanthropist. A reputation, Julia repeated slowly. To hide what you really are. Santos met her gaze directly. To become what I want to be. There's a difference. What are you? Before Santos could answer, Dante returned. His expression was grim. Confirmed. Fox Carboni, deceased, found in the parking garage of his office building approximately 45 minutes ago. Single gunshot wound to the head, execution style. Memphis PD is calling it a robbery gone wrong, but the scene is clean, professional. Santos's jaw tightened. The killer? Based on the description Miss Robert provided, I'd say Killian O'Brien, Irish mob enforcer, works exclusively for Marcus Devlin. The name landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Marcus Devlin, Santos's former partner, former friend, current enemy. They'd worked together once, running acquisitions and territory management before Santos decided to go legitimate. Devlin had called him weak, said he was betraying their history. The falling out 3 years ago had been ugly but contained. Until now. Devlin's making a move, Santos said quietly. Fox was the opening play. He's going after my legitimate operations, trying to expose me or force me back into the old ways. Julia struggled to sit up despite Dr. Ricci's protests. I need to leave. I need to go to the police, tell them what I saw. Santos moved quickly, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder, keeping her down. You can't. Why not? Because Killian O'Brien works for one of the most dangerous men in Memphis. Because if you go to the police, they'll put you in protective custody and Devlin will have you killed within 24 hours. He has people everywhere, Julia. Cops, judges, prosecutors. You think you'll be safe in a cell? You'll be dead before your statement is even typed up. Fear flickered across Julia's face, quickly replaced by anger. So what? I'm supposed to just stay here? With you? I don't even know you. You know enough, Santos said. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? In your client meetings, in your business circles. The silent Don. The Sicilian who runs Memphis without firing a shot. The man who owns half the city's legitimate businesses and all of its shadows. Julia's silence was confirmation enough. I'm Santos Montana, he said formally, as if they were meeting at a cocktail party instead of in a blood-stained office with a dead body cooling 3 miles away. Head of the Montana family. And you, Julia Robert, just witnessed a murder that's connected to a war you don't understand. Devlin's men will hunt you until you're dead. You can't go home. You can't go to the police. If you want to survive, you stay with me. That's not a choice, Julia whispered. That's a prison sentence. It's the only choice that keeps you breathing. Dr. Ricci cleared his throat. She shouldn't be moved far in her condition, but she also shouldn't stay in the city, too exposed. Santos had already made the decision. "We're going to my family estate. It's 40 minutes outside Memphis, gated, secure, private. She'll be safe there while we figure out what Devlin's planning." Julia tried one more time to protest, but the pain medication was pulling her under. Her eyes were heavy, her words slurring. "I don't want this. I just wanted to pay off my father's debts and live quietly." "I know," Santos said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "But sometimes the life we want and the life we get are two different things. Right now, the life you get includes my protection, unless you prefer Killian O'Brien's knife." That silenced her. 20 minutes later, Santos was helping Julia into the back of his black Mercedes, Dante at the wheel, 2 armed guards in a follow car. Julia was barely conscious, leaning against Santos as he settled her into the leather seat. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her words soft and confused. "You don't even know me." Santos looked down at her, at this woman who'd survived when she should have died, who'd run bleeding through Memphis streets and somehow found sanctuary at his doorstep. "Because you survived when you should have died, and because Fox was a good man who didn't deserve what happened to him. I protect what matters to me, Julia. And you just became a witness I need alive." It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was something Santos didn't quite understand himself. Something about the way she'd looked at him with desperate eyes and trusted him to catch her. Something about the fire in her even as she bled out on his floor. Something that made him want to protect her, not just because she was useful, but because she deserved protection. As the Mercedes pulled away from Nocturne and into the Memphis night, Santos made a silent vow. Devlin had started this war by killing Fox and trying to kill Julia, but Santos would finish it. And this time he wouldn't be silent about it. The drive through wrought iron gates felt like crossing into another world. Julia pressed her face against the Mercedes window, watching as manicured gardens gave way to a sprawling antebellum mansion that belonged in a history book. White columns rose 3 stories high, supporting a wraparound veranda that glowed softly under strategically placed lights. Live oaks draped with Spanish moss lined the curved driveway, their branches creating natural archways overhead. "This is where you live?" Julia's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from exhaustion and shock. "This is home," Santos replied simply, as if everyone grew up in estates that could house 50 people comfortably. The pain medication had dulled the sharp edge of her wound, but exhaustion pressed down on Julia like a physical weight. Every breath hurt. Every movement reminded her that hours ago, she'd been stabbed and left to die. The beauty of the estate felt surreal, disconnected from the violence that had brought her here. Dante opened her car door. Santos appeared at her side immediately, his hand steady at her elbow as she climbed out. "Easy," he murmured. Dr. Ricci said no sudden movements. Julia wanted to protest that she could walk on her own, but her legs wobbled the moment her feet touched the ground. Santos's arm wrapped around her waist, supporting her weight as they climbed the front steps. The double doors opened before they reached them, revealing a small Asian woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an expression that suggested nothing surprised her anymore. "Mrs. Chen," Santos said. "This is Julia Robert. She'll be staying in the blue guest suite. She's recovering from an injury and needs rest, quiet, and anything she asks for." "Mrs." Chen's gaze swept over Julia with professional assessment, taking in the bandages visible beneath the blanket Santos had wrapped around her shoulders, the paleness of her skin, the exhaustion in her eyes. "Of course. I'll prepare the room and bring up soup. She needs to eat." "Thank you." The interior of the mansion matched its exterior promise. Gleaming hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gilded frames lining the walls. A curved staircase swept upward to the 2nd floor, its mahogany banister polished to a mirror shine. Everything spoke of wealth that had accumulated over generations, carefully preserved and proudly displayed. Santos guided Julia up the stairs slowly, matching his pace to hers. On the 2nd floor, he led her down a hallway lined with closed doors before stopping at one near the end. "The blue suite," he said, opening the door. Julia stepped inside and stopped breathing. The room was larger than her entire apartment. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in crisp white linens and a blue silk duvet that matched the drapes. An attached bathroom visible through an open door showed marble fixtures and a clawfoot tub. French doors on the far wall led to what appeared to be a private balcony overlooking the gardens. "This is too much," Julia said faintly. "It's what's available." Santos moved to the French doors, checking the locks with practiced efficiency. "The bathroom has everything you need, Mrs. Chen will bring clothes until we can retrieve yours from your apartment. Your medication is on the nightstand with instructions." If you need anything, press the call button by the bed." "The rules," Julia said, remembering what he'd said in the car during her brief moments of consciousness. "You said there were rules." Santos turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You stay on the estate grounds. The gardens, the stables, the house, all of it is safe. But you don't leave the property. No phone calls without my approval. No contact with the outside world until I neutralize the threat against you. There will be a guard stationed outside your door at all times." "A guard," Julia's stomach twisted. "To keep me prisoner." "To protect you," Santos corrected firmly. "Devlin has a long reach. If he discovers you're alive and knows where you are, he'll send people. The guard is there to make sure no one gets to you, not to keep you trapped." Julia wanted to argue, wanted to demand her freedom, but exhaustion was winning. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. "And how long does this last?" "Until it's safe, or until Devlin is no longer a threat. That could be weeks, months. It could be." Santos moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Julia. We'll talk more tomorrow when you're stronger." He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Julia stood alone in the beautiful room, listening to the quiet footsteps of the guard taking position in the hallway. Then she collapsed onto the bed and let the tears come. Sleep didn't come easily. Julia drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind replaying the parking garage in vivid detail, Fox on his knees, the gunshot, the killer's cold eyes finding hers, the knife sliding between her ribs. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw blood. Every time she opened them, she remembered she was trapped in a stranger's mansion, dependent on a criminal's protection. Around 2 a.m, Julia gave up trying to sleep. Her wound throbbed despite the medication. Her thoughts raced in circles. She needed to move, to think, to do something other than lie in the dark replaying her near-death experience. The guard was indeed stationed outside her door, a young man with dark hair and watchful eyes. He straightened when she emerged. "Miss Robert, do you need something?" "Just walking," Julia said. "I can't sleep." He nodded. "Stay inside the house. Don't go outside alone." Julia wandered the second-floor hallway, studying the family photographs that lined the walls. Santos as a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing beside a beautiful woman with his same dark eyes. Santos older, maybe 20, in a suit that looked too formal for his age, standing next to an elderly man with sharp features and harder eyes. Santos with a teenage boy who looked so much like him they had to be brothers, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. The first floor drew her down the staircase. Oil paintings depicted landscapes and seascapes, each one clearly expensive, clearly authentic. Antique furniture filled rooms that looked like they belonged in a museum. Everything was beautiful, preserved, cared for with obvious devotion. Then Julia found the library. The double doors stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. She pushed them open and stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes and modern editions alike. Leather armchairs flanked a fireplace where embers still glowed. A rolling ladder provided access to the higher shelves. The scent of old paper and furniture polish filled the air. Julia moved to the nearest shelf, running her fingers along the spines. First editions of classics she'd only read in paperback, rare manuscripts in protective sleeves. Art history texts that would cost thousands to acquire. This wasn't just a collection. This was a lifetime of careful acquisition, of love for books and knowledge. "Can't sleep?" Julia spun, her hand flying to her wounded side. Santos stood in the doorway and she barely recognized him. Gone was the intimidating man in the expensive suit. He wore dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger, more human, less like the Silent Dawn and more like just a man who couldn't sleep either. "I'm sorry," Julia said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I couldn't sleep and I found this room and I shouldn't have come in without asking." "You're welcome to anything in this house," Santos said, moving into the library. "Especially the library. My mother collected books. She believed beauty could redeem anything." Julia noticed the past tense. "She's gone?" 15 years. Santos moved to the fireplace, adding a log to the dying embers. "Cancer. She died when I was 23, before I took over the family business." "I'm sorry." Santos shrugged, but Julia saw the grief that flickered across his face before he controlled it. "She would have liked you. She loved books and art. Anything beautiful that required patience to appreciate." "Your home is beautiful," Julia said honestly. It feels like history lives here. 4 generations of Montanas. Santos gestured to one of the leather chairs. Sit. You shouldn't be standing long with your injury. Julia sank into the chair gratefully. Santos disappeared through a side door and returned moments later with a tea service. He poured 2 cups with practiced ease, handing her one that smelled of chamomile and honey. My great-grandfather built this house, Santos said, settling into the chair across from her. Giovanni Montana. He came from Sicily with nothing but the clothes on his back and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive. He worked in the railroads, saved every penny, invested wisely. By the time he died, he owned half the businesses in this part of Memphis. Legitimate businesses? Mostly. Santos's smile was wry. Giovanni wasn't afraid to bend rules when necessary, but he believed in building something that would last, something his children could be proud of. Julia sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. What do you do, Santos? I mean, I know what you are, but what do you actually do? I run the family business, restaurants, nightclubs, real estate holdings, investment portfolios. Most of it is completely legitimate now. Some of it exists in gray areas. I'm trying to change that. Why? Santos looked at her for a long moment. Because I don't want to be my father. Because I want to build something that doesn't require violence to maintain. Because I'm tired of being the monster everyone expects me to be. The honesty in his voice surprised Julia. She studied his face in the firelight, seeing vulnerability there that didn't match the image of the silent dawn. I restore photographs, she said softly. Old family pictures, damaged albums, portraits that have been sitting in attics for decades. People bring me their memories and I bring them back to life. I love it because everyone deserves to remember the beautiful moments, even if time has tried to erase them. That's a good philosophy. They talked for over an hour. Santos told her about the mansion's history, about each painting and piece of furniture, about his mother's garden that Mrs. Chen still maintained. Julia shared stories about her strangest restoration projects, about the time someone brought her a photograph that had survived a house fire, about her father who'd taught her to see beauty in broken things. For that hour, Julia forgot she was terrified, forgot she was trapped, forgot that the man across from her was a criminal who'd killed people and would probably kill again. He was just Santos, who loved his mother's memory and made good tea, and smiled when Julia described the intricacies of digital photo restoration. When exhaustion finally began to pull at her again, Julia stood carefully. I should try to sleep. Santos rose as well, walking her to the library doors. Julia. She turned. You're not a prisoner here. You're under my protection. There's a difference. Julia wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him. But she was also aware that protection from a man like Santos Montana came with a price she didn't yet understand. A debt she might spend years repaying. A connection that might change her life in ways she couldn't predict. Thank you for the tea, she said instead. Santos nodded. Good night, Julia. As she walked back to her room, the guard falling into step behind her, Julia realized something that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. She was starting to trust Santos Montana, and that might be the most dangerous thing of all. Morning light filtered through the French doors, waking Julia from the first real sleep she'd managed since the stabbing. Her side ached, a dull throb that reminded her everything from the previous night had been terrifyingly real. She was still in Santos Montana's guest room, still trapped in a gilded cage, still alive because a mafia boss had decided she was worth protecting. Voices drifted up from somewhere below. Julia moved to the balcony, careful not to strain her stitches, and looked down at the gardens. Santos stood on the stone patio, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian. Even from a distance, his body language radiated authority. This was a man who commanded empires with a word, who shaped lives and destroyed enemies without raising his voice. Mrs. Chen brought breakfast on a silver tray, fresh fruit, toast, eggs prepared perfectly, and coffee that smelled like heaven. Mr. Montana asked me to check on you. How's the pain? Manageable, Julia lied. He wants you to rest today. Doctor's orders. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. But if you need anything, just press the call button. I've been with this family for 30 years. I know how to keep secrets, and I know how to help young women who've stumbled into situations they don't understand. After Mrs. Chen left, Julia showered carefully, keeping her bandages dry, and dressed in the clothes that had been laid out: soft cotton pants and a loose shirt, nothing like her usual jeans and band tees. Someone had retrieved items from her apartment. The thought of Santos's men going through her things should have bothered her more than it did. She found Santos in what appeared to be his office, a massive room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a mahogany desk. He sat behind it in a crisp white shirt and gray slacks, reading through documents while Dante stood nearby reviewing something on a tablet. Julia. Santos looked up immediately. You should be resting. I've been resting. I'm going crazy up there. She gestured to the papers spread across his desk. What are you doing? Running a business. Santos leaned back in his chair. I own 3 restaurants in downtown Memphis, 2 nightclubs including Nocturne, and several real estate holdings. Someone has to manage them. As if to prove his point, his phone rang. Santos answered in Italian, his voice dropping into a tone that suggested whoever was on the other end had disappointed him. He spoke for 5 minutes, never raising his voice, but Julia watched Dante wince at whatever Santos was saying. When he hung up, Santos switched immediately to English. The shipment from Sicily arrives Thursday. Make sure customs doesn't ask questions. Dante nodded and made a note. Shipment? Julia asked. Wine, Santos said smoothly. For the restaurants. My family still owns vineyards in Sicily. Julia didn't believe him for a second, but she didn't push. Dante cleared his throat. We have a problem. Killian O'Brien was spotted near Miss Roberts' apartment last night. He's looking for her. Julia's stomach dropped. They know where I live. They know where you lived, Santos corrected. You're not going back there. Dante, what else? Word on the street is Devlin's putting out a narrative. He's telling the other families that you've gone soft, that you're weak, that protecting a witness over business interests proves you've lost your edge. He's building support for a takeover. Santos's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Let him talk. Words are wind. What matters is what I do, not what Devlin says. There's more, Dante continued. Devlin's putting together some kind of alliance. The Irish, maybe the Russians. He's claiming you've abandoned the old ways, that you're more concerned with playing philanthropist than protecting territory. Fox, Julia said suddenly. Both men looked at her. That's why he killed Fox, isn't it? It wasn't just about territory or revenge. It was about destroying your reputation. Santos stood, moving to the window. Fox Carboni was more than an art dealer. He was my bridge to legitimacy. For 5 years, he helped me build a respectable art collection, authenticated pieces for private collectors, introduced me to museum boards and gallery owners. I donated to restoration projects, funded exhibitions, established myself as a patron of the arts. It was my exit strategy. Exit from what? From this, Santos gestured broadly. From violence, from crime, from the legacy my father left me. I wanted to build something clean, something I could pass to my children without shame. Fox was helping me do that. His murder wasn't about business, Julia. It was about trapping me. Devlin knows that if I retaliate violently, I prove his point I'm still the monster, still my father's son. But if I don't retaliate, I look weak and lose control of Memphis. Julia moved closer to him. How many people have you killed? The question hung in the air between them. Santos turned to face her, his expression unreadable. I need to know, Julia pressed. You want me to trust you, to believe I'm safe here? Tell me the truth. How many lives have you taken? How many have you ruined? Santos met her gaze directly. I inherited an empire built on blood. My father was a monster who ruled through fear and violence. When I took over at 25, I had 2 choices, continue his legacy or change it. I chose change. I've restructured our operations, moved away from extortion and violence, focused on legitimate business. But that doesn't erase what came before. That's not an answer. The answer is enough that I remember each face, but not so many that I've lost count. Does that satisfy you? It didn't, but Julia recognized honesty when she heard it. Santos wasn't trying to paint himself as innocent. He was simply stating facts. After Santos returned to his calls, Julia escaped to explore the estate grounds. The gardens were magnificent roses, hydrangeas, perfectly manicured hedges creating intimate spaces. She found an art studio in a converted carriage house, still set up with easels and dried paint tubes. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her like a ghost. Mrs. Montana's studio, the housekeeper explained. Santos keeps it exactly as she left it. He comes here sometimes just to sit. What was she like? Kind, gentle, everything his father wasn't. Mrs. Chen studied Julia with shrewd eyes. Santos is nothing like his father. That man was evil, through and through. Santos has demons, but he's fighting them every day. He's trying to be better. Beyond the studio, Julia discovered stables housing 3 beautiful thoroughbreds. A young stable hand was brushing a glossy black mare. "Mr. Montana's horse," he said when Julia approached. "He rides every morning before dawn. Says it's the only time his mind goes quiet." Julia tried to imagine Santos Montana seeking peace on horseback, alone in the darkness. The image didn't match the cold, controlled man she'd met at Nocturne, but it fit the person she'd talked to in the library, the one who made tea and spoke of his mother with tenderness. That afternoon, Julia returned to the library, drawn by the comfort of books and quiet. She was browsing the art history section when a photograph slipped from between the pages of a leather-bound volume. The image showed Santos, maybe 20 years old, with his arm around a teenage boy who had the same dark eyes and strong features. The boy was laughing at something, his whole face lit with joy. Santos looked younger, softer, protective. The date on the back read 13 years ago. "You found Marco." Julia turned. Santos stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Your brother?" "My younger brother." Santos moved into the library, taking the photograph from her hands with reverence. "He was 16 when this was taken, 17 when he died. I'm sorry. Marco wanted nothing to do with the family business. He wanted to be a teacher, of all things. Wanted to help kids, make a difference." Santos's voice was rough with old grief. "There was a car bomb meant for my father. I was supposed to be in that car too, but I stayed behind for a meeting. Marco took my place." Julia's chest tightened. "Santos. He died because of the Montana name. Because of choices I didn't make but inherited. Because violence breeds, violence and innocence always pay the price." Santos looked at the photograph, his thumb brushing over Marco's face. "I took over the family business 3 months later. I was 25 years old and I made a vow at Marco's grave I would end the cycle. No more innocents would die because of us. I would transform this family or die trying." Julia understood grief like that. Grief that shaped choices, that drove you to become someone different, someone better. "My father was a Memphis police officer," she said quietly. "Honest, honorable, the kind of cop who believed the badge meant something. He refused to take bribes from mob families, refused to look the other way when evidence appeared. They killed him for it. Ruled it a random mugging, but I knew better. I was 19. Santos looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the shared pain they both carried. "That's why you work alone," he said. "Why you stay up late restoring photographs by yourself. You're afraid to let people close. That's why you're trying to go legitimate. Why you collect art and donate to museums. You're trying to save people you can't bring back." They stood in the library, 2 people scarred by violence they didn't choose, carrying guilt for deaths they couldn't prevent. Santos reached out slowly, giving Julia time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, gentle and careful. "I won't let them take you too," he said, his voice raw with conviction. "Whatever it costs, whatever I have to become, Devlin won't touch you. I swear it." Julia believed him. Maybe she was foolish to trust a man who'd killed, who ran a criminal empire, who'd taken her freedom in the name of protection, but she believed him anyway. Because sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who'd already lost everything. They had nothing left to fear, nothing left to lose, and that made them either monsters or heroes. Julia was beginning to think Santos Montana might be both. 3 days into her stay at the estate, Julia woke to raised voices downstairs. She pulled on a robe and found Santos and Dante in the office. Surveillance photos spread across the desk like a hand of cards revealing a losing game. "Devlin's been planning this for months," Dante said, pointing to time-stamped images. "These are from his meetings with the O'Brien family going back to January. And here," he tapped another photo, "the Russian Volkovs, February. He's been building an alliance piece by piece." Santos's jaw was tight. Fox's murder wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. The opening move in a larger strategy. Dante pulled up more files on his tablet. "Devlin's narrative is spreading. He's telling everyone you've gone soft, that your legitimate business interests have made you vulnerable, that you're more worried about museum donations than protecting territory." Julia stepped into the room. Both men looked up, Santos's expression shifting immediately from cold calculation to concern. "You should be resting." "I'm tired of resting." Julia moved to the desk, studying the surveillance photos. Marcus Devlin stared back at her from a dozen different angles, red hair, sharp features, cold eyes. The same eyes that had ordered Fox's execution. "Tell me what's happening." Santos exchanged a glance with Dante, then gestured for her to sit. "Devlin is trying to unite the other families against me. He's using Fox's death and your presence here as evidence that I've lost my edge. My presence? Julia's stomach sank. What do you mean? Every family in Memphis knows Santos Montana took in a witness, Dante explained. Knows he's protecting you instead of eliminating a liability. Devlin is framing it as weakness, as proof that Santos values one woman over business interests. The pieces clicked together in Julia's mind with horrifying clarity. I was meant to survive. Santos leaned forward. What? That night in the parking garage, Killian O'Brien is a professional, right? An enforcer. He killed Fox with a single shot, clean and precise. But me? Julia touched her wounded side. He stabbed me once and let me run. A professional killer could have finished the job, but he didn't. Devlin wanted me alive. He wanted me to run somewhere, to become someone's problem. He wanted you to run to me, Santos said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. I'm not just a witness. I'm bait. I'm the trap. Julia's voice shook. Every family watching sees you choosing to protect me, and they question your judgment. Devlin knew I'd come to you because Fox mentioned your name before he died. He orchestrated the whole thing. That manipulative bastard, Dante muttered. Julia stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I brought this to your door. I'm the weakness he's exploiting. You should have let me bleed out on your marble floor. You should have turned me away. Santos was beside her in 3 strides, his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Stop. You're not a weakness. You're proof that I'm still human. Devlin thinks that's a liability. I think it's the only thing that separates me from monsters like him. But your reputation can be rebuilt. Your life can't. Santos's grip gentled. I made my choice, Julia. I'd make it again. For 2 days, Julia felt useless. She was healing physically, but restlessness gnawed at her. She couldn't work, couldn't help, could only sit in luxury while Santos and Dante strategized her survival. It was driving her mad. The 3rd morning, she returned to the library with purpose. If she couldn't fight, she could research. She pulled every art history book, every auction catalog, every authentication record Santos kept in his extensive collection. Her laptop retrieved from her apartment along with her equipment hummed to life as she started cross-referencing. Fox Carboni had authenticated dozens of pieces for Santos's collection over 5 years. Julia found his records meticulous, professional. But when she started searching for those pieces in international auction databases, something strange emerged. A Modigliani portrait authenticated by Fox for Santos's collection had sold at a Paris auction 3 months ago. But Julia knew that piece was in Santos's climate-controlled vault. She'd seen the inventory list. She dug deeper. A Picasso sketch, a Renaissance-era religious triptych, a collection of Chinese ceramics, all authenticated by Fox, all supposedly in Santos's possession. All sold in European markets within the past year. Santos. Julia burst into his office, laptop in hand. I found something. For the next hour, she walked him through her discovery. Someone had been creating forgeries of Santos's authenticated pieces and selling them across Europe. The originals remained in his vault, but the fakes were flooding the market, devaluing his collection and destroying his credibility. Devlin, Santos said, his voice deadly quiet. Fox must have discovered the forgery operation. That's why he was killed. It accomplishes everything Devlin needs, Julia explained. It devalues your collection, destroys your reputation in the legitimate art world, and makes you look foolish. Every collector who trusted your authentication now questions your judgment. Dante pulled up new intelligence. There's a gallery opening in 3 days. Devlin's hosting a private collection showcase downtown. Julia checked the catalog. Her blood ran cold. These pieces. I recognize them from Fox's authentication records. The forgeries are going to be there, sold to Memphis's wealthiest buyers. An idea formed, dangerous and risky. We attend the gallery opening. Santos looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Absolutely not. Listen to me. I can identify forgeries. I've been doing digital restoration for years. I know brush strokes, aging patterns, pigment compositions. We go to the gallery. I expose the fakes publicly, and Devlin's entire scheme collapses. You prove that your legitimate business path is worth protecting because you just saved dozens of wealthy collectors from fraud. You want to walk into Devlin's territory and call him out in front of Memphis's elite? Santos shook his head. He'll kill you. Not in front of witnesses, not with cameras everywhere. Julia moved closer. You gave me a choice to stay or run. I stayed. Now give me the choice to fight or hide. I'm tired of hiding, Santos. Let me help you end this. Santos studied her face for a long moment. Julia watched the internal battle play out in his eyes, the desire to protect her warring with the knowledge that she was right. Finally, he turned to Dante. Full security detail. I want men inside and outside the gallery. Backup positions. Exit strategies. One hint of danger and we extract her immediately. Understood. Santos looked back at Julia. We do this my way. You stay close to me at all times. You identify the forgeries and we leave. No heroics, no risks. Agreed? Agreed. The next 2 days passed in intense preparation. Julia studied the gallery catalog, memorizing every piece that would be displayed. She practiced her explanations, learned the technical language that would be most convincing to wealthy collectors. Santos drilled her on security protocols, made her memorize exit routes, fitted her with a panic button disguised as jewelry. But between the strategy sessions, something else developed. Late nights in the library became less about planning and more about talking. Santos shared stories of Marco, of his mother's paintings, of the life he wished he'd been born into. Julia told him about her father's idealism, about the photographs she'd restored that made people cry with joy, about the small apartment she'd left behind that suddenly felt less like home than this estate. They orbited each other like binary stars, drawn together by gravity they couldn't resist. Stolen glances across the dinner table, hands brushing when passing documents, the awareness of each other's presence in every room they shared. One night, reviewing gallery floor plans in the library, Santos reached out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind Julia's ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. Their faces were inches apart, close enough that Julia could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel his breath against her lips. The tension between them was electric, magnetic, inevitable. Julia's breath caught. Her heart hammered. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to close the distance and discover what his mouth tasted like. But Santos pulled back, his hand dropping away. Not like this. Santos. Not when you're here because you have no choice, he said, his voice rough. Not when you're dependent on me for survival. When I hold all the power in this situation. When I kiss you, Julia. It will be because you chose me, not because I'm the only option you have. The rejection stung, even though Julia understood the reasoning. Santos was trying to be honorable, trying to give her agency in a situation where she had so little. It made her want him more. The night before the gallery opening, Julia stood on her balcony watching stars emerge over the estate grounds. The gardens below were peaceful, beautiful, a world away from the violence that had brought her here. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow they'd walk into danger together, trusting each other with their lives. Footsteps behind her. Santos joined her at the railing, close but not touching. Are you scared? Julia asked. Terrified, Santos admitted. His honesty still surprised her. Not of Devlin, not of what happens at the gallery, of losing you before I've even had you. Julia turned to face him. In the moonlight he looked younger, more vulnerable. This was the man beneath the reputation, beneath the cold control. This was Santos Montana without his armor. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen. Santos squeezed her hand, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. Tomorrow they'd face Devlin together. Tomorrow they'd risk everything on a dangerous gambit. But tonight, under the stars, they had this moment of peace before the storm. And somehow, that felt like enough. The custom black dress fit Julia like it had been designed for her body specifically. Because it had. Santos had called in a favor from a designer who'd taken her measurements and created something elegant, understated, expensive. The silk moved like water, the neckline sophisticated without being revealing. Diamond studs borrowed from a collection that probably cost more than her entire life's earnings glinted at her ears. Julia barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like she belonged in Santos Montana's world. Santos appeared in her doorway, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean build, his dark hair styled perfectly, a platinum watch catching the light, old money elegance personified. Together, they looked like a power couple stepping out for an evening of culture and sophistication. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ready? Santos asked. Julia touched the panic button disguised as a bracelet on her wrist. As I'll ever be. The drive to downtown Memphis took 30 minutes. Dante drove, his eyes constantly checking mirrors. 2 more vehicles followed at a discreet distance, carrying Santos's security team. Inside the gallery, 2 men would pose as art buyers. Outside, 2 more would cover exits. Santos had a weapon concealed beneath his perfectly tailored jacket, though he'd made it clear he hoped the evening would end without bloodshed. This was supposed to be an elegant takedown. Exposure through expertise, not violence. The Devlin Gallery occupied a converted warehouse in the Arts District. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting softened by modern fixtures, polished concrete floors. Champagne flowed freely. Well-dressed servers circulated with canapes. Memphis's elite mingled beneath paintings worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, completely unaware they were admiring forgeries. Julia's stomach twisted. These were pieces Fox had authenticated for Santos's collection. Stolen, copied, and now being sold to unsuspecting buyers who trusted Marcus Devlin's reputation. They'd barely entered when Devlin materialized, moving through the crowd with predatory grace. Tall, red-haired, sharp-featured, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Julia recognized him from the surveillance photos, but seeing him in person was different. This man had ordered Fox's execution, had sent Killian O'Brien to kill her. Santos Montana. Devlin's voice dripped with condescension. What a surprise. I didn't think this was your scene anymore. Aren't you too busy running restaurants to appreciate fine art? Santos's expression remained perfectly neutral. I heard you had pieces from an impressive private collection. I came to see them for myself. Devlin's gaze slid to Julia, and she saw recognition flicker across his features. He knew exactly who she was. And who's this lovely companion? Santos's hand settled possessively on Julia's lower back, warm and steadying. Julia Robert, restoration specialist. She's advising me on potential acquisitions. How convenient. Devlin's smile was all teeth. A restoration expert. Perhaps she can settle a debate I've been having about authenticity and provenance. Would you both join me for a private viewing? I have some exceptional pieces in the back gallery. Santos and Julia exchanged the briefest glance. This was it, the moment they'd prepared for. We'd be delighted, Santos said smoothly. Devlin led them through the main gallery to a private viewing room in the back. Thick carpet muffled their footsteps. The lighting was professional, designed to showcase art without causing damage. 6 paintings hung on the walls, each one a masterpiece worth hundreds of thousands. Julia recognized every single one from Fox's authentication records. Several other collectors had been invited to this exclusive viewing. Memphis's wealthiest art enthusiasts, people who attended every gallery opening, who competed to own the most impressive private collections. Perfect witnesses for what was about to happen. These are the crown jewels of tonight's showcase, Devlin said, gesturing expansively. Each authenticated by the late Fox Carboni, rest his soul. A tragic loss for Memphis's art community. Santos's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Julia stepped forward, her trained eye already cataloging inconsistencies. May I examine them more closely? She asked, pulling out the jeweler's loupe Santos had provided. Of course, though I assure you, the provenance is impeccable. Julia moved to the first painting, a portrait in the style of Modigliani. She studied it for a long moment, then moved to the second, the third. Behind her, the other collectors watched with polite interest. Santos stood perfectly still, his presence a solid anchor at her back. Finally, Julia straightened and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. These are forgeries. The room went silent. Excuse me? Devlin's voice was dangerously quiet. Forgeries. Excellent quality. Professionally done, but fake nonetheless. Julia pointed to the Modigliani. The brushstroke patterns don't match the artist's documented technique. See here? The layering is wrong. Modigliani used elongated strokes that followed the contours of his subjects. These are shorter, more hesitant. She moved to the next piece. This canvas shows aging inconsistencies. The craquelure pattern suggests artificial aging, rather than natural deterioration over decades. And the pigment composition, she gestured to a patch of blue. This particular shade didn't exist during the period this piece was supposedly created. The other collectors pressed closer, examining the paintings with new scrutiny. I authenticated these exact pieces for Mr. Montana's collection 2 years ago, when Fox Carboni brought me the photographs for digital archival, Julia continued. The originals are in Mr. Montana's climate-controlled vault. These are copies. Whispers erupted. Devlin's smile finally vanished. A bold accusation, he said, recovering quickly. Perhaps it's Montana's pieces that are forged. After all, the Sicilians have a long history with stolen art and trafficking. Maybe poor Fox discovered Santos's forgery operation. Is that why he was killed? To silence him? The counterattack was brilliant, turning Julia's exposure back on Santos. Several collectors looked uncertain, glancing between the two men. But Santos had anticipated this. He made a subtle gesture, and Dante entered through a side door carrying a leather briefcase. He set it on a viewing table and opened it, revealing stacks of documentation. Fox Carboni's original authentication reports, Santos said calmly. Time-stamped, notarized, cross-referenced with international art databases. Here are the provenance records tracing each piece's ownership history. Here are forensic analysis reports from 3 independent laboratories confirming paint composition, canvas age, and authenticity markers. Everything is documented and verifiable. Dante spread the papers across the table with practiced efficiency. The evidence was irrefutable, overwhelming, damning. Santos's pieces were genuine. Devlin's were fake. Julia watched Devlin's expression shift from confidence to fury as his entire scheme collapsed in real time. Every collector in the room now questioned his credibility. Every piece in his gallery was suspect. His reputation, everything he'd built, was crumbling. Then Devlin made a fatal mistake. His hand moved toward his jacket, fast and desperate. Julia saw the motion, saw metal glinting, saw the gun emerging from concealment. Time seemed to slow, every detail crystallizing with terrible clarity. "You were supposed to die in that parking garage," Devlin snarled, the gun leveling at Julia's chest. "Let me finish what Killian started." Santos moved. Julia had never seen anyone move that fast. One moment he was beside her, the next he was in front of her, his own weapon drawn with practiced precision. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, louder than anything Julia had ever heard. Devlin's gun clattered to the floor. Devlin himself fell backward, clutching his chest, blood spreading across his expensive white shirt in a crimson bloom. His eyes were wide with shock and pain, mouth working soundlessly. Chaos erupted. Collectors screamed and scattered. Dante and the security team secured the room with military efficiency, weapons drawn, establishing a perimeter. But Santos ignored all of it. He holstered his weapon and turned to Julia, his hands immediately going to her face, her shoulders, checking for injuries with shaking fingers. "Did he hurt you? Are you okay?" Julia talked to me. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I'm not hurt." Santos was covered in blood spatter, dark droplets across his face and suit. The gun was still in his hand, still smoking slightly. Behind him, Devlin lay motionless on the expensive carpet, surrounded by forged paintings that would never be sold. This was the violence Julia had known existed but never witnessed. The cold efficiency of death delivered without hesitation. Santos had killed a man right in front of her, and he'd done it to save her life. She should be horrified, should be recoiling, should be seeing him as the monster the world believed him to be. Instead, Julia placed her hands over his, feeling the tremors he was trying to suppress. "You saved my life. I couldn't let him." Santos's voice cracked. "I couldn't lose you." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Santos pulled out his phone, already making calls. His voice shifted back to controlled authority, speaking to lawyers, to contacts in the Memphis PD, to people who owed him favors. The self-defense case was solid. Dozens of witnesses had seen Devlin draw first, had heard his confession about ordering Julia's death. Within minutes, the scene was contained. Statements were being taken. Santos's lawyers arrived faster than the ambulances. Everything was handled with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, who knew exactly how to manage violence and its aftermath. Santos kept Julia close, his arm around her shoulders as they were led out of the gallery. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. None of it felt real. "Everything's changed now," Julia said quietly as they reached the Mercedes. Santos looked down at her, his dark eyes haunted. "I chose violence to protect you. I became the man I've spent 15 years trying not to be. I became my father." "No." Julia stopped him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Your father would have let me die. Would have used me as leverage or eliminated me as a threat. You gave me a choice. You trusted me. You protected me. That's not your father. That's you." Santos pulled her closer as they climbed into the car. As they drove away from the gallery, from the body, from the life he'd taken, Julia felt the weight of what had happened settling over both of them. Santos had crossed a line tonight. Had chosen her over everything: his reputation, his carefully constructed legitimacy, his years of avoiding violence. And somehow, instead of feeling like failure, it felt like truth. Sometimes love required becoming exactly who you needed to be, even if that person was dangerous. The Memphis Police Department's downtown precinct smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucracy. Santos and Julia sat in separate interview rooms for hours, giving statements to detectives who already knew how this would end. Security footage from the gallery showed everything. Devlin drawing his weapon. Santos responding. The self-defense claim was ironclad. Julia recounted the events mechanically, the forgery exposure, Devlin's confession about Fox's murder, the gun aimed at her chest. She described it clinically, professionally, as if she were discussing someone else's life. It was the only way to get through it without falling apart. Through the glass partition, she could see Santos in another room, his expensive suit still spattered with blood, speaking with his lawyers. 3 of them surrounded him like a protective barrier, handling paperwork with practiced efficiency. This wasn't their first time navigating the intersection of violence and law. By sunrise, they were cleared to leave. The district attorney herself appeared, reviewed the evidence, and signed off on the justifiable homicide ruling. Devlin's associates were being rounded up, his forgery operation dismantled. Fox Carboni's murder was officially linked to Devlin's organization, everything tied up neatly, almost suspiciously so. Julia watched Santos shake hands with the DA, saw money she wasn't supposed to see change hands in an envelope disguised as documents. This was his world where justice could be purchased, where connections mattered more than truth, where protection came with a body count and a price tag. The Mercedes waited outside, Dante at the wheel as always. Julia climbed into the back seat, her elegant dress wrinkled and stained, her updo falling in messy strands around her face. Santos slid in beside her, and silence filled the space between them. Dawn painted Memphis in shades of gold and pink. The city looked peaceful, beautiful, completely unaware that in a converted warehouse gallery, a man had died hours ago. Blood was being cleaned from expensive carpet. Evidence was being catalogued. And Julia Robert, who'd spent her life restoring photographs of happier moments, had witnessed death delivered with cold precision. "You killed him," Julia said quietly. Santos didn't flinch. "I did. You spent 15 years trying to be different from your father. 15 years building legitimate businesses, collecting art, donating to museums, trying to prove you weren't a monster." Julia turned to look at him. "Tonight you became exactly what you were running from." Santos's jaw tightened, pain flickering across his features before control reasserted itself. He stared straight ahead, Devlin's blood still dark on his shirt cuffs. "And you did it for me," Julia finished softly. "I would do it again," Santos said, his voice rough. "I'd do it 1,000 times if it meant you survived." They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. The estate appeared through the trees, white columns glowing in the early morning light. Home. Except Julia wasn't sure if this was home or just a beautiful cage she'd willingly entered. Santos walked her upstairs, their footsteps echoing in the quiet mansion. Mrs. Chen had left tea and food outside Julia's door, but neither of them acknowledged it. They stopped at her threshold, the same place they'd stood a dozen times before, always with this careful distance between them. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Santos said finally. "I'm sorry you had to be part of this world, witness what I'm capable of. I'll make arrangements today. New identity, relocation, enough money to start over anywhere you want. Devlin's dead. You're safe now. You can leave." Julia's heart clenched. "What if I don't want to leave?" Santos looked at her like she'd struck him. Disbelief and hope warred across his face. "Julia, you think I'm staying because I'm traumatized? Because I have Stockholm Syndrome?" Julia stepped closer, closing the distance he always maintained. "I'm staying because for the first time in my life someone chose me. Not convenience, not obligation. Me. You risked everything to protect me. Your reputation, your legitimacy, 15 years of trying to be someone different. You became the man you hate to keep me alive." Santos's control was cracking. Julia could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "I spent 15 years trying to prove I wasn't my father. Building a legitimate empire, donating to museums, funding scholarships, collecting art, all of it to erase the blood on my family name. Then you stumbled into my club bleeding, and I threw it all away. One woman, and I became him. I'd become him 1,000 times over if it meant keeping you alive." "You're not your father," Julia said fiercely. She reached up, cupping his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Your father would have let me bleed out on his floor. He would have turned me over to Devlin to save himself. He would have used me as leverage and discarded me when I was no longer useful. You gave me a choice. You protected me even when it cost you everything. That's the difference. That's everything." Something shattered in Santos's eyes. His restraint, his careful control, The walls he'd built between them, all of it broke. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry, all the pent-up emotion of the past week pouring out in one moment. Fear, relief, desire, tenderness, everything they'd been dancing around since that first night. Julia kissed him back with equal intensity, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. She tasted coffee on his lips, felt the tremor in his hands as they settled on her waist. This wasn't the controlled man who ran an empire. This was Santos stripped bare, vulnerable, human. They stumbled into his room. Julia wasn't sure who moved first. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world. Dawn light filtered through the windows, painting everything gold. "Tell me to stop," Santos murmured against her mouth. "Tell me this isn't what you want. Tell me you're not choosing this because you have no other options." "I'm choosing you," Julia said clearly. "Not because I'm trapped, not because I'm scared, because I want this. I want you." They fell onto his bed as dawn became morning. Blood-stained clothes were discarded, barriers dissolved. For hours, they existed in a space outside time, outside consequences, just two people finding comfort in each other after surviving something terrible. Afterward, tangled together in Egyptian cotton sheets, they talked. Really talked. Santos told her everything, his father's crimes in detail, the specific moment Marco died, the first man he'd killed, the deals he'd made to transform the family business. He held nothing back, offering her the darkest parts of himself without pretense. Julia shared her fears that she'd never be normal again, that loving a man like him meant accepting violence as part of life, that she was choosing a path where danger would always be one step behind. "I can't be a different man," Santos said, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "This empire, this family name, the blood that came before, it's who I am. I can't erase it. But I can promise you honesty. I can promise you choice. Every day you wake up here, it will be because you choose to stay, not because you're trapped. And I will use every resource I have, every connection, every ounce of power, to keep you safe." Julia propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. In the morning light, with his guard completely down, Santos looked younger. The weight he carried was still there, but shared now. "I've spent my life restoring broken things. Damaged photographs, faded memories, images people thought were lost forever. Maybe I'm drawn to broken things because I know they can be made whole again. You're not broken, Santos. You're just unfinished. And I want to see what we become together. Even knowing what I am, what I've done? Especially knowing," Julia said. "Because you showed me who you are when everything was on the line. You chose to protect rather than eliminate. You gave me agency when you could have taken it. You became the monster to save me. But that doesn't make you one. It makes you human." Santos pulled her down, kissing her with tenderness this time rather than desperation. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I didn't plan to, didn't want to, but I do. I love you too." The words felt natural, inevitable. Julia had loved him since that moment in the library when he'd made her tea and talked about his mother, maybe even before that. They fell asleep as morning light filled the room, exhaustion finally claiming them both. Santos's arms were wrapped around Julia, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Julia pressed against his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady, strong, alive. Blood and sorrow had brought them together. Violence had forged their connection. But lying there in the quiet dawn, tangled together and finally honest, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like hope. For the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't feel like an obligation or a burden. It didn't feel like running from the past or trying to erase mistakes. It felt like possibility, like choice, like two broken people deciding to be whole together. Outside, the estate was waking. Mrs. Chen would be starting breakfast. Dante would be coordinating security. The world would keep turning, demanding attention and decisions. But for these few hours, Santos and Julia existed outside all of it. Two people who'd survived when they shouldn't have, who'd found each other in the worst circumstances, who'd chosen love when logic suggested running. Sometimes the most dangerous choice was the one your heart made. And sometimes, that choice was the only one worth making. 6 weeks after the gallery, Julia woke in Santos's bed to find her belongings had been moved from the guest suite during the night. Her laptop sat on the desk by the window. Her clothes hung in the walk-in closet beside his suits. Her father's leather bag, the one he'd given her for graduation, rested on the chair where she'd left it the night before. "You're not a guest anymore," Santos said from the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. You're home. Home. The word settled over Julia like a warm blanket. This sprawling estate with its white columns and manicured gardens, this house filled with history and secrets, this life she'd stumbled into bleeding and desperate it was home now. Mrs. Chen was delighted. I've been waiting 30 years for Mr. Santos to find someone who makes him smile like that, she said, squeezing Julia's hand. Your father would be proud. You survived, and you chose to build something beautiful from it. The adjustment wasn't seamless. Julia's apartment downtown was closed up, her lease terminated, her life as a solitary photo restoration specialist packed into boxes and absorbed into Santos's world. Some clients called looking for her. Julia couldn't answer. Too much exposure, too many questions about why she'd disappeared, why her name had appeared in news reports about the Devlin Gallery shooting. Santos solved it with typical efficiency. You need a workspace, somewhere you can continue your work without public scrutiny. He converted one of the old carriage houses on the estate grounds into a state-of-the-art restoration studio. Professional lighting, climate control, top-of-the-line computers and scanning equipment, archival supplies Julia had only dreamed of affording. A space designed specifically for her craft, private and secure. I can't accept this, Julia protested weakly, knowing she already had. You already did, Santos said, reading her mind. Besides, I need someone to digitize and restore the family photographs. 4 generations of Montanas, and half the pictures are deteriorating in albums in the attic. Her first project was personal, the Montana Family Collection. Hundreds of photographs spanning decades, many damaged by time and neglect. Julia lost herself in the work, carefully scanning each image, removing scratches and tears, restoring faded colors, bringing moments back to life. She found photographs of Santos as a boy, serious even then. Santos with Marco, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. Santos's mother in her art studio, paint on her hands, joy in her smile. Santos's father, cold-eyed and intimidating even in family portraits. Santos would visit the studio while she worked, drawn by curiosity or maybe just by her presence. He'd watch her restore images of his mother, and his voice would soften as he shared stories. She tried to keep beauty alive in a house filled with violence, he said one afternoon, watching Julia work on a portrait of his mother holding a young Santos. She painted, collected books, played piano. My father hated it, thought it made us soft, but she never stopped. She sounds remarkable. She was. Santos touched the photograph gently. You remind me of her sometimes, the way you see beauty in broken things, the way you refuse to let darkness win. The outside world shifted around them. With Devlin dead and his forgery operation exposed, the power structure in Memphis reorganized itself. The Irish O'Briens, the Russian Volkovs, the smaller families, they all watched to see what Santos Montana would do next. He proved he wasn't weak. He'd killed to protect what was his. But he also proved he wasn't indiscriminately violent. He was strategic, controlled, willing to kill when necessary but preferring diplomacy. It was exactly the leadership style Memphis's underworld respected. Santos doubled down on legitimate expansion. 2 new upscale restaurants opened within a month. He invested in downtown real estate development, purchased a historic theater for renovation, established a foundation for arts education in Marco's name. Julia became his bridge to the legitimate art world. She introduced him to curators and collectors, people who knew her work and trusted her judgment. Slowly, Santos's reputation transformed. He wasn't just the silent Don anymore. He was a patron, a philanthropist, a man building cultural legacy. You're changing how they see me, Santos said one evening, reviewing invitations to gallery openings and museum fundraisers. I'm just helping them see what's already there, Julia replied. But it wasn't all beautiful transformation. Loving Santos meant accepting his world, all of it. Julia attended dinners where business and crime blurred together, where conversations included coded references to territories and shipments. She met his associates, men with hard eyes and violent histories. She learned to recognize the guards who rotated shifts, to accept that her phone was encrypted, that leaving the estate required coordination and security protocols. She was building a life, but it was a life most people would never understand. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Julia was working late in her studio when a news report flickered across her laptop screen. Warehouse fire in South Memphis. 2 fatalities. Suspected arson. The location was in disputed territory, and Julia's stomach sank with terrible certainty. She found Santos in his office, reviewing contracts with Dante. Did you order that? Julia asked without preamble. The warehouse fire. The 2 men who died. Dante excused himself immediately. Santos set down his pen and met her gaze directly. Yes. Why? They were moving heroin through my territory without permission. They ignored 2 warnings. They needed to understand that some lines can't be crossed. Julia's hands shook. You killed them. I gave the order. My men executed it. The duality was crushing. This man who made her tea and restored family photographs, who spoke tenderly about his mother and kissed Julia like she was precious, he also ordered deaths with a phone call. I can't do this, Julia whispered. I can't pretend it's okay. I can't just accept that you kill people and come home and act like everything's normal. Santos stood, moving around the desk but not touching her. I won't lie to you. I won't pretend to be something I'm not. This is who I am, Julia. This is the world I inherited, and the empire I run. Violence is part of it. Will always be part of it. If you can't accept that, I'll arrange for you to leave. No judgment, no pressure. Do you want me to leave? God, no. Santos's control cracked. I want you to stay more than I've wanted anything in my life, but I need you to choose this knowing what it means. I can't promise you safety. I can't promise a life without violence. All I can promise is honesty and choice. Julia looked at him, this complicated, dangerous, tender man who'd saved her life and changed everything. Can we have children in this world? Can we raise them knowing what you do? I don't know, Santos admitted. My father raised children in this world, and look what happened. Marco died. I became this. But maybe we could be different. Maybe we could give them choices we never had. That's not a real answer. It's the only answer I have. They talked for hours that night. Hard, honest conversation about futures and fears. They didn't reach perfect conclusions, but they reached truth. Julia discovered she was stronger than she'd thought. She wasn't a victim waiting to be saved. She was a partner building a life, making choices with open eyes. She started attending some of Santos's business meetings, only the legitimate ones, but her presence there mattered. She offered perspectives he hadn't considered, connections he couldn't access. She was becoming part of his world, reshaping it from within. 3 months after moving in, Julia proposed organizing an art exhibition at Nocturne, a fundraiser for Memphis arts education, showcasing local artists and Santos's restored collection, a way to cement his reputation as a cultural benefactor. Santos agreed immediately. Make it spectacular. Julia poured herself into the project. She curated pieces, coordinated with artists, designed the space. The restored photographs of Santos's mother's paintings were displayed prominently, alongside contemporary works from Memphis artists. Everything was elegant, sophisticated, purposeful. Opening night. Nocturne transformed. The club where Julia had stumbled bleeding and desperate became a gallery celebrating beauty and possibility. Memphis's elite attended politicians, entrepreneurs, collectors, everyone who mattered. Santos wore a black Tom Ford suit, looking every inch the cultured patron. Julia wore midnight blue silk, standing beside him like she belonged there. Because she did. They moved through the crowd together, Santos's hand at her lower back, introducing her to everyone, including her in conversations. This was their debut as a couple, and Memphis society accepted it with surprising grace. Near the end of the evening, Santos pulled Julia aside. They stood in front of the restored photograph of his mother's self-portrait, a beautiful woman with dark eyes and a gentle smile. She would have loved you, Santos said quietly. She always believed beauty could redeem anything. I used to think she was naive. Then you stumbled into my club bleeding, and somehow you made me believe in redemption too. Julia leaned into him, feeling his solid warmth, his steady presence. Around them, the exhibition continued proof that violence and beauty could coexist, that broken things could be restored, that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. We're building something good, Julia said. Despite everything, we're building something worth keeping. Santos kissed her temple. We are. For that moment, everything was perfect. The life they'd fought for, the love they'd chosen, the future finally within reach. Julia knew challenges remained. New danger would always lurk at the edges. New loving Santos, Montana meant accepting a world most people would never understand. But standing there surrounded by art and elegance, Santos's arms around her, Julia had no regrets. She'd made her choice, and she'd make it again, every single day. 1 year to the day after Julia stumbled through Nocturne's doors bleeding and desperate, Santos brought her back. The club was closed. lights dimmed except for soft illumination along the curved staircase. No crowd, no music, no witnesses. Just the two of them in the space where everything had begun. Santos led her to the exact spot where she'd collapsed, where her blood had stained marble that had been scrubbed clean but would always carry the memory. Julia's breath caught. She knew what this moment meant before Santos said a word. "A year ago, you crashed into my life covered in blood, and you changed everything," Santos began, his voice steady but emotional. "I spent 15 years trying to be someone my mother could be proud of, someone worthy of Marco's memory. I built legitimate businesses, collected art, funded scholarships, all of it trying to erase the blood on my family name. But it took you, broken and bleeding and brave, to show me what redemption actually looks like." He took both her hands in his. "Redemption isn't erasing the past. It's building something beautiful from the ruins. It's choosing love when logic says run. It's becoming who you need to be, not who you wish you were." Santos knelt exactly where he'd knelt that first night, when he'd caught her before she hit the ground. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside, an emerald surrounded by diamonds caught the light deep green matching Julia's eyes perfectly. "Julia Robert, will you choose me? Not because you're trapped or scared or grateful, but because you want the life we're building together. Not because you have no other options, but because this is the option you want most. Marry me." Tears streamed down Julia's face. She pulled him to his feet, needing to look into his eyes when she answered. "I choose you. I chose you that first night when I told you about Fox. I chose you when I stayed instead of running. I chose you when I kissed you covered in another man's blood. I choose you every single day, Santos. Yes. Yes to everything." Santos slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her, Julia tasted salt, his tears or hers, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. They stood in that spot for a long time, holding each other where violence had first brought them together, where protection had transformed into love, where a dying woman and a dangerous man had found something neither expected. 6 months later, they married in Sicily at the Montana family's ancestral estate. The property sat on a hillside overlooking the Mediterranean, white stone buildings glowing in the afternoon sunday. Olive groves stretched in every direction. This was where Giovanni Montana had been born before leaving for America with nothing but dreams and determination. The ceremony was small, intimate. Dante stood as best man, his wife beside him. Mrs. Chen dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief throughout. A handful of trusted associates, the ones who'd become family over the years, filled the remaining chairs. Julia wore her mother's vintage lace dress, carefully preserved for decades. When Santos saw her walking toward him between rows of white roses, his composure cracked. Tears streamed down his face freely, unashamed. They'd written their own vows. Santos spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you honesty, even when the truth is ugly. I promise you protection, with every resource I have. But most importantly, I promise you choice. Every day you wake beside me will be because you chose to be there, not because you're trapped. You will always have freedom, always have agency, always have the power to walk away, and I will spend every day giving you reasons to stay." Julia's hands shook as she held his. "I promise you acceptance. All of you, the darkness and the light, the violence and the tenderness, the criminal and the patron, the monster and the man. I promise you partnership, not blind obedience. I'll challenge you, support you, stand beside you as an equal. And I promise to never let you forget that you're more than your father's legacy. You're Santos Montana, the man who chose redemption. My choice, always." They exchanged rings in Italian and English, binding themselves to each other and to the complicated, beautiful life they'd chosen. When the officiant pronounced them married, Santos kissed Julia like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. The celebration lasted until dawn, filled with wine and laughter and music that drifted across the hillside. For one night, there was no violence, no danger, no empire to manage, just love and joy and possibility. 2 years after the wedding, Julia stood in the nursery at the Memphis estate, rocking their 6-month-old daughter. Leona, named after Santos's mother. Leonie had Julia's blonde hair and Santos's dark eyes. She was perfect, a miracle neither of them had been sure they deserved. "Shh, baby girl," Julia murmured, swaying gently. "Sleep now. Mama's here." Movement in the doorway caught her attention. Santos leaned against the frame, still in his work clothes but with his tie loosened, watching them with an expression that made Julia's heart clench. Pure, uncomplicated joy radiated from him, something she'd never seen in those early days when he was all controlled danger and careful walls. Leona represented everything they'd fought for. A future without blood. A legacy built on love instead of fear. The cycle broken. Finally. Santos crossed the room silently, wrapping his arms around both of them. Julia leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth, his solid presence. Their daughter slept peacefully between them, oblivious to the world her parents had navigated to give her this safety. "We did it," Julia whispered. "We built something beautiful from all that blood and fear." Santos kissed her forehead, then pressed his lips to Leona's downy head. "You built it. You showed me it was possible. Before you, I was just going through motions, trying to be better without understanding what better meant. You taught me. We taught each other." Evening found them hosting dinner at the estate. Dante and his wife arrived with wine. Mrs. Chen prepared her signature dishes, fussing over Leona with grandmotherly devotion. The dining room filled with warmth and laughter, conversation flowing easily. This was the life Santos's mother had dreamed of, family built on love rather than obligation, power used to protect rather than destroy, a home filled with joy instead of fear. If Leone Montana could see them now, Julia thought she'd be proud of the man her son had become. After dinner, Santos and Julia walked through the gardens with Leona asleep in Julia's arms. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and amber. They passed the stables where Santos still rode every morning, the carriage house converted into Julia's studio, the rose garden Mrs. Chen tended with devotion. They walked past the spot where Julia had first explored these grounds 2.5 years ago, terrified and trapped, unsure if she was guest or prisoner. So much had changed since then. She'd been transformed from victim to partner, from stranger to wife, from frightened witness to the woman who'd helped reshape Santos Montana's world. "Do you ever regret it?" Santos asked suddenly, stopping beneath a magnolia tree. "Choosing this life? Choosing me? You could have been safe somewhere else, living normally, without guards and encrypted phones and the constant awareness that danger exists." Julia looked at him, really looked at him. The man who'd saved her life, who'd killed for her, who'd given her choice when she had none. The man who woke at dawn to ride horses alone, who made her tea at midnight, who cried when his daughter smiled. The man who ran a criminal empire and donated to art museums, who ordered deaths and funded scholarships, who was everything contradictory and complicated and impossibly hers. "Only on Tuesdays," she teased. Santos smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Julia grew serious. "Never. Not once. You were worth every drop of blood, every moment of fear, every hard choice. You were worth choosing then. You're worth choosing now. You'll be worth choosing tomorrow and every day after." Santos kissed her, careful not to wake Leona sleeping between them. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. "My mother used to say beauty could redeem anything," he murmured. "I thought she was naive, thought she didn't understand how deep the darkness went, how permanent bloodstains were. But she was right. Beauty can redeem anything." Julia understood what he wasn't saying. She was his redemption. Leona was proof it worked. This life they'd built from violence and fear and impossible choices, this was beauty emerging from darkness. "Even a man named Montana," Julia finished softly. "Even a life that started in blood." They stood there as twilight deepened, a family forged in fire and violence but bound together by choice. Julia had stumbled into Santos's world dying, and he'd caught her. But somewhere along the way, she'd caught him too. Caught him falling into the darkness he'd spent 15 years fighting. Caught him before he became the monster everyone expected. Caught him and showed him redemption was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Empire still needed managing. Danger still lurked at the edges. But tonight, in this garden, with their daughter sleeping peacefully, and the future stretching before them full of possibility, they had everything that mattered. They had each other, and they'd chosen this, every step of the way. That choice made all the difference. And that is how it all unfolded. If this story shook you or left you speechless, hit subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments what you would have done differently if you were in their shoes. Your reactions keep these stories alive, and trust me, the next one will hit even harder. Until then, stay sharp, stay strong, and never underestimate the quiet ones.